The Accidental Wizard, Part 10, 15th of March. I'm in Japan. There's been a really serious earthquake of 9 magnitude 4 days ago. That's big. I watched in horror on the news the previous Friday as the resulting tsunami washed across northeastern Japan around Sendai. Lorries and cars on the roads were swept away like matchsticks. Ships, weighing hundreds of tons, were smashed into bridges and destroyed. The damage was unbelievable, as a 10-metre high wave swept across the flat, low-lying farmland in the Sendai and the Fukushima prefectures. Never quite sure about Fukushima. Fukushima, I think the Japanese call it. Tokyo is eerily quiet and empty. The inhabitants of this great city are staying at home, a bit like us. The train from the airport has stopped running, so I take a cab on a journey which normally takes 2 hours or more. 45 minutes later, I'm at my hotel. Unbelievable. As I lie awake that night in the hotel, I feel the presence of Michael and Uriel, the protector and the archangel of floods and earthquakes. They tell me I can't stay in Japan for long, and that we will not be able to complete my intended mission. There's too much danger from new earthquakes and radiation. The Fukushima nuclear power plant has been inundated by the tsunami and damaged by the quake. It's currently on fire and spent fuel rods are boiling dry. With the cooling pumps inoperable, there's a real chance the entire network of 6 reactors will explode and melt down. I fall asleep, but I'm woken by what I think of the couple in the room next door enjoying some noisy sex. But the banging sound is my headboard, not theirs. The hotel is swaying and rocking as a series of pulses thump through it, and these aftershocks continue over the next day. Compared to Haiti, I'm expecting the shoot for Channel 4 back in the UK to be much easier logistically, but we're told there's little fuel to get around by car. Even helicopters are short of aviation fuel, and they're not being allowed into the disaster area unless they're on a rescue mission. So rescue teams can listen for the tiny sounds of any survivors calling for help. Food and water is running out in a large area outside the affected area as the roads are blocked and there's nowhere to stay. It's Haiti all over again. 16th of March. The danger from the reactors is worsening and people are being advised to leave the country if they can. Japan feels like a very dangerous place to be as the problems are far from over. Generally, once a fault line has had a big release, it quiets down after a few aftershocks over the following days. But the subduction zone off Honshu, the main island of Japan, isn't doing that. There is an aftershock every 15 minutes or less, and we are 5 days into the quake. This must mean the fault line is still moving. This is after Japan moved 3 meters to the east and then back a meter. The northeastern area has dropped a meter in height. The Earth has shifted a meter on its axis and slowed its rotation a tiny yet measurable amount. That's a very big shift indeed. Roger Billum, my partner in seismological crime, has arrived from his home in Colorado. He is very overexcited and pleased to be here from a scientific point of view. We plan a flight up to Akita, then a chopper ride into the disaster area to study the aftermath and look for geological clues about what the quake has done to the land. We know that the cause is submerged 100 miles off eastern Japan, under the sea, where one side of the 2 fists, if you like, of the subduction zone between the tectonic plates has sprung up and dislodged the sea along the coastline. The death toll is rising. In fact, it takes a leap when half a town of 19,000 souls is reported as all missing, presumed dead. I wonder if my job here, as well as documenting the science for Channel 4 with Roger, is another soul rescue experience. Archangel Michael and Uriel say not. The ancestors of the dead, who the Japanese are very actively connected to, have the situation wonderfully in hand. But they say I am there to protect Tokyo from a second big quake, like the one which destroyed the city in 1923. There's a second fault line off Tokyo called the Tokia Fault, which is under enormous load, and that has to be contained. The lesson for me on this trip is to wield the power of the Ark of the Covenant for the first time. They say I will know the moment. Roger and I take a helicopter flight from Tokyo and head out over this spectacular city towards the affected area. As we're landing back in Tokyo at the heliport, the pilot hears over the radio that we've probably just flown through the radioactive plume from Fukushima and that there is a live earthquake taking place underneath us. Roger is almost beside himself with excitement as we film in the heli. As we land, there are cracks in the tarmac which are oozing sand. This is because the water in the ground beneath is being squeezed and stretched by the force of the quake, and it's being turned into an earthy milkshake by the pressure in a process known as liquefaction. In the van heading back to the hotel, I know it's the moment to invoke the Ark. I say a silent prayer to cloak Tokyo in Michael and Uriel's protective shield, and ask for the power of the Ark of the Covenant to safeguard Tokyo from the destructive power of the scar in the earth 100 miles off the coast. This book has many messages, and this is the last message, which is the end of the book. The Maya people, who lived in Mexico and Guatemala for thousands of years, I'm going to read that again because it didn't make any sense at all. The Maya people, who lived in Mexico and Guatemala for thousands of years, seemed to almost completely vanish in about 800 AD, are resonating in my head. No self-respecting New Ager can afford a fascination with the ancient peoples of South America. I'm going to read that again as well. No self-respecting New Ager can avoid a fascination with the ancient peoples of South America. The Incas, the Aztecs, and the Maya demonstrated a grasp of astrophysics, astrology, and mysticism which is admirable even today. What is genuinely so fascinating about them was their use of the long count calendar. This is the most accurate calendar ever devised without the aid of modern devices like the atomic clock in Greenwich, London, which is accurate to millionths of a second. They, as far as we know, had no such instruments apart from a clever geared ancient slide rule. They were able to accurately predict the position of our solar system in relation to the rest of the universe over a precise period of 5,125 years. This also helped them plan for increases in solar activity, which affects the weather and therefore farm crops, and allowed them to plan for lean years. Why they disappeared is a mystery, but it's thought it was a combination of the impact of invading nations from elsewhere. The Spanish and the Danes were in South America centuries before Columbus landed and discovered America again for Spain, and that they died from disease and famine. The Maya knew the sun switches its north and south pole every 11.5 years and goes through a cycle of increasing solar intensity about the same period. So that means that unlike the Earth, our sun swaps its north and south pole every 11.5 years. The solar maximum, as it's called, which occurs every 11 to 14 years, has a considerable impact on the Earth. The greatest modern threat is to communications and the power supply, which a big solar storm can disrupt. And as we move more and more towards being reliant on electricity, that is a deeply frightening fact. Mass coronal ejections caused by the rotation of the sun, which acts like an electrical dynamo, leap away from the sun and flow out into space. They're released when the sun's electromagnetic field can no longer hold them. They contain almost unimaginably powerful blasts of energy, which, if released towards our planet, 93 million miles away, bathe us in cosmic rains, also known as the solar wind. It's not a wind as we know it in our atmosphere. This is what causes the northern lights, the aurora borealis. We're protected thanks to the Van Allen belt and other electromagnetic shields which surround the Earth. If they weren't there, we would fry in minutes in the radiation. I've discovered recently that there might be a correlation between increases in solar storms and the triggering of major earthquakes. There's been a significant solar storm a few days before every single major earthquake in recent years. These include Indonesia, Pakistan, China, Haiti, Chile, New Zealand, and Japan. Of course, there are solar storms regularly, but the connection seems to be pretty direct. And when there is a major quake, something called dynamic triggering takes place. This means subsequent quakes quickly run round the tectonic plate system where the quake originated in a knock-on effect. The Earth's crust is an arrangement of plates which slide and grind against each other over millions of years. They move at about the same speed as the rate your fingernails grow, but the pressure they exert on one another causes sections to suddenly move from time to time, and that gives the quake. They create mountain ranges like the mighty Himalayas and the Rockies. The Maya understood all of this, and they had a three-dimensional mapping system of the heavens. When you consider the implications of that, it's mind-blowing. And by the way, the little icon for all these podcasts is a Mayan chart. How did they know that not all those lights in the sky were the same distance away? Astronomy's mind-boggling. The nearest star to us, Alpha Centauri, is 4.5 billion light years away. Our own sun is a mere 8 minutes at the speed of light. 8 minutes away, 4.5 billion light years. 8 minutes, 4.5 billion light years. Massive difference. The nearest galaxy to us, Andromeda, is 2 million light years away. The Maya knew we would return to exactly the same place we occupied in our solar system's rotation around the centre of the Milky Way on December the 21st, 2012, which we occupied exactly 20,000 years earlier. How the hell did they work this out? Because they're spot on. This was also the day their 5,125-year-long calendar finished, and there wasn't another one to follow. A lot of doom-mongering has been written on this subject, but that's not necessarily the only outcome. But there are factors which suggest there is some sort of cosmic U-turn approaching, and this fact is the message the angel realm are asking me to share with you. There, I've said it. That feels better. I think the Maya were able to download their information in the way I, and others like me, can. It's not necessarily scientific. It's not based on calculation. It's not there one minute, but it is the next. Ever since I found myself floating around above my own body on the tour, it's been there. So having received the message, I've been looking for a more scientific context to help explain it as best I can in the most logical way. And this is what I found out, partly from my work making science documentaries and partly from research I've done. Large solar flares cause clouds to form and promote more rain, which can lead to flooding. Solar flares possibly can trigger earthquakes. No scientist will yet confirm this link, but I know it's correct based on my own observations of their occurrence. Our own magnetic poles slowly slip every few million years. I'll read that again. Our own magnetic poles slowly flip every few million years, 40 times or so in the last 75 million years. The North Pole is currently moving position towards Russia at about 35 to 40 miles an hour. Not a huge rate, but the rate is increasing. We can tell when the poles have flipped, in case you're wondering how we can possibly know what the poles were doing millions of years ago, by studying sediments. Deposits in ice, soft muds in the ocean's lifeless abyssal plains, which are huge, and in rock, tell us everything we need to know about the Earth's history. And when the poles flip, what are known as chaotic sediments are left. In other words, all sorts of muck is suddenly laid down as the event causes chaos, like floods and tidal waves, which wash right round the Earth. For this to happen, the poles would need to flip in a matter of hours, which scientists tell us is very unlikely. But the sediments seem to tell another story. The Maya were also very aware of the position of the planets during the equinoxes and solstices. They believed that when the planets were in a straight line, like a celestial sort of cat's cradle, this also had an effect on disruption on Earth. Scientists think this theory is nonsense, but I think they're quite brave to take this view, bearing in mind how accurate the Maya were on so many things. I am told that a vast body like Jupiter has a millionth of the gravitational effect of the Moon, which by comparison has on shifting the world's oceans up and down with the tides. We've lived with the tides all our lives. It feels normal and acceptable. But someone worked out that if you gave a scientist the data relating to the Earth and the Moon's mass, the 240,000 mile distance between them and their gravitational fields, the slide rule answer on the potential effect of the Moon on the tides would be 1 or 2 centimetres difference between high and low tide, not 3 metres. And I worked it out, and that's a margin of error of 9,000%. So scientists don't know everything, and they're not always right. Find me another decade or so which has had so many direct hits on us by nature. This is not the sort of thing anyone wants to hear. No one thanks you for telling them. But why do you think there are so many orb pictures turning up? Why people like me are being overwhelmed by the presence of angels who are disturbed by our agitation? I didn't ask for this to happen to me, and in a way, I wish it hadn't, as it's turned my world upside down. Your governments don't want to cause panic as a result of becoming aware of this because control will be lost. And stopping the populace from panicking is their obsession. But how is it that the remains of a 15-high giant can be unearthed? A UFO can hover over King David's Mount in Jerusalem and be filmed by a dozen different people, and I've seen all of those films. How come Nostradamus' lost book can contain a final blank page depicting 2012, and these events not be front-page news when death and murder are daily? Who or what do you think is controlling the media and our leaders? You must decide these things for yourselves, draw your own conclusions and act. Just remember, the angels are with you. Call on them for help and they'll come. If the human race turns to the light like a field of sunflowers turning towards the sun's warm rays, and renounces the dark, the fear, the negative, who knows what we can achieve or change? Nothing is set in stone, and we can triumph by choosing love over hatred, peace over conflict. There is a simple logic to survival. If you outlive your usefulness, you perish. We see it in nature and history. We must evolve as a race, and very quickly. Most of us are amazing beings and deserve better than the world we have created for ourselves. Lady Gaia will shrug us off like she has many times before, unless we change. Blessings, and may God's love be with you.